So basically choosing numbers randomly can give you some pretty amazing properties. And one of the ways to utilize this property is in engineering. So here, let me give you an example of how do we use the amazing property of Monte Carlo method to help us calculate probabilities or calculate things we want to calculate. So here's what I want you to try to figure out. So imagine you are building a quadcopter. That's something we are doing in projects for some time now. And imagine you're building the quadcopter for autonomous delivery of goods, like what Amazon Prime Air is doing, right? So one of the primary concerns is wind. So you have to be able to go out and deliver for most of the time, even though there is wind around the city. And imagine you want to deliver in Boston. So what would you do first to figure out how should I design my quadcopter so that I can overcome the wind in Boston most of the time? And imagine the design requirement is for 99% of the time, you want to be able to go out and deliver stuff. What would you do first? Before you are able to figure out what kind of quadcopter you want to design.
Figure out your delivery range. Like what range of Boston would you be considering? Like
sure, what range of Boston you want to consider?
Where's the warehouse in relation to the city?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but first of all, your quadcopter can have to be able to take off and go deliver, right? So imagine like the most amount of wind your quadcopter can sustain is X, and you want to figure out what X has to be for you to be able to deliver for 99% of the time.
You need to model the wind.
You have to model the wind?
Yeah.
And how would you get historical data on the wind, right? So let's say I have obtained historical data for the wind. And here I have a wind.mat that loads for the past. If I load it, let me actually load this again. And I have wind, which is a series of wind data, because this is manufactured, but like I'm sure you can get real data, and you may have to pay some money to get the data of a sufficient quality. But like once, let's say this is the past, this is the wind in meters per second for the last 10,000 days. All right, what would you do after you get the data? Plot it as a histogram. So if I hist wind, and hist wind, you get this. All right. So what's next?
So if you want to be able to deliver 99% of the time, then you want the 99% of the area to be like under your X.
Right. So the histogram gives you the concentration of the number of measurements, right? So basically, you want to decide on the tolerance of your quadcopter so that 99% of the weight or the area lies towards the left of this histogram. And how would you do that? How do you figure that out?
You assume it's a normal distribution, then you can use the error function.
Okay, so here we have one suggestion. Assuming this is a normal distribution, I can use the error function. All right. Any other suggestions?
And T. I guess it's. I was gonna say T statistic, but there's a lot of data, so we'll just use the.
Okay, you're saying using T statistics,
Well, just
which
because it's small sample sizes, but it's a very large sample size. Back up that.
Yeah. Here we have a pretty large sample size, and if so your suggestion of using a normal distribution would make a lot of sense if I only have very sparse data, right? So if I have, let's say, 10 samples, which is a lot fewer than what I have in order to determine the 99% of the time, right? So even if my tolerance exceeds the maximum of the 10, I cannot really have a very high confidence that I can be able to fly for 99% of the time. But here I actually have 10,000 data points, right? What do I do?
Can we plot the cumulative distribution?
One thing I can do is I can plot the cumulative distribution. And what do I do with the cumulative distribution?
And then, so if you know how many data points you have,
Mm-hmm.
and then you go take 99% of those, and then you can see where it intersects on the CDF.
And how do I plot the CDF?
Does MATLAB have a function?
That's a good question. I actually don't know if MATLAB has a function because there is a very natural way to plot the CDF of the data.
Oh, you can do cum sum. Like
A cum sum of wind?
Maybe not of wind. That's
I
probably
would
not gonna
get
be the
something
way.
like that.
Yeah, it's not gonna go.